My name is Tommy Toon Stories. I'm autistic, I'm a VTuber, and I'd say most of all, I'm a nerd and a storyteller. I'm also a game master and tabletop RPG player. Why do I enjoy being a GM? And how did I even get started with this very nerdy hobby? Throughout my life, I've always found myself drawn to stories. Whether it was the stories of movies, games, shows, books, or even just word of mouth. No matter the medium, I found stories entrancing. It allowed me to leave behind the stresses and uncertainties of reality for just a little while. And my journey as a writer started from a book and video games. But it led me down a path I never anticipated, becoming a GM and telling stories in a way I never knew possible. I grew up in a time on the edge of nerd culture being uncool and becoming more mainstream. But one thing I was not really familiar with growing up was, of course, D&D. Besides references, of course, to being its uncoolness. But I was intrigued, to say the least, as my dad had told me about it. My first experience with it was experiencing a bit of D&D through 4.5. My first character was named Black Nail. He was a goblin barbarian who believed himself to be a genius. And he was a character made out of pure just concept, not really having any connection to a story, or most importantly to me, myself. The next character I'd get to play a bit more of, and he was built for more pieces of myself, was a lizardfolk cleric named Combra. Combra lived in an isolated human village that did not fully trust him. They did not fully understand him, nor did he fully understand them. He did his best to adjust, but in the end, he was blamed for his best friend's death, and so he was forced to leave. Combra was unintentionally built as a mirror to my autistic experience and how I viewed myself. A strange, even non-human being trying to be around humans while wanting nothing but love and companionship. Or at least some understanding, but he was never met with it. While most lizard folk were described to have a lack of emotion and understanding of it, Combra was defined by his emotions. Sometimes it was curiosity, sometimes it was compassion, anger, and at one point, it was sorrow. His story was a story that I didn't get to finish in a campaign. What it did do was give me a glimpse into what TTRPGs really are, and I wanted to share the joy I felt in playing the game, so I became a GM. I invited two friends to start a group, and that group would expand into a group of three. They played Yintul, a lizardfolk rogue, Redoron, an elven wizard, and Azir, an Azamar sorcerer. And while I did play the role of DM, early on I had a DM PC with the party. He was meant to make it easier for my friends to start getting into character, but he became more than that. He became a character that reflected myself in many ways. He was made with my own insecurities, demons similar to my own. It helped to make the emotional moments of the story feel even more real. And one of my favorite moments of that game were not the moments of battle, but rather those moments of character-driven emotion. Sure, the battles were amazing and they brought a lot of hype, but the story I often tell of that first campaign is the tragedy of Meepo. Yintul and the Kindred Slayers, before they met Azir, met two NPCs, a pair of mated kobolds named Meepo and Tripo, whose tribe had been vanquished by the eldritch abomination that they would face, and the goblins they controlled that the party would also face as well. Yintul promised he would protect the two of them, even arming them with custom-made bone rapiers to help defend themselves. But Tripo had a secret unknown to the party and her mate. Later on, at the end of the first dungeon, leading to the first boss fight, in a bedroom we face an eldritch monstrosity, and Meepo, wanting to protect his mate, fought alongside the party. However, the little kobold was not a warrior, and he was struck down. And within Yintul's arms, Meepo died. It was a sudden turn in the narrative determined by dice. And for those moments followed, we were no longer in a bedroom eating pizza. We were in a cave, and we were exiting that cave, and we were incredibly sad. But The end of that cave revealed a more tragic revelation. Tripo was pregnant and hadn't told her mate yet, because she thought they were all going to be dead anyway. Yet again, the party was hit with the emotional impact, and it is one that has stayed with me for years. Those moments of bittersweet tragedy are some of my favorite tropes to play with when it comes to writing. And so experiencing the tropes of storytelling through D&D and delivering that to others was an eye-opening experience, to say the least. I remember one time in high school, an English and writing teacher of mine, out of the blue, said D&D was dangerous because it would make you do things you wouldn't normally do. And to an extent, she was right about one thing. It can make you do things you never thought you would, or say things you never would have. I never would have become the man I am today without D&D. It is an integral part of my journey as a person and a storyteller. It opened up new ways of thinking. It made me become a teacher in some ways. But most importantly, it allowed me to face familiar issues from a different view or angle. And it forced me to become more of a social planner and to take charge in situations I felt anxious in. This game also broke me, or rather, the expectations upon myself did, and I experienced creative burnout for the first time. But after a while, another story was told after the Kindred Slayer saga, that being the Goldwalker saga. It was a story of defiance in the face of darkness, one that, without even realizing it, I was telling about myself and my own mental health struggles personified in that story. While the Kindred Slayer story was exciting, dark, and emotional as well, the Goldwalkers campaign and its setting of Turksis was different. More so in the sense of, I'd begun to build my fantasy universe even further, and this was the first new location since the first campaign story. Turksis was once a lush and bountiful land, much like the rest of Jorthamos. But many years ago, a vengeful demigod, the last son of Tiamat, Zoltan, burnt and cursed the land, leaving nothing but a dying land that would become shrouded in darkness and filled with monsters of all sorts. But despite those troubles, and the scars, people lived there regardless. Throughout the campaign, they'd face many threats. Some were cursed monsters, eldritch nightmares, and bloodthirsty villains. But the one whose shadow hung over them was Zoltan, and in spite of the fear, they faced all the threats head on. This is all to say I have found myself connected to the stories and worlds of these TTRPGs with great creative passion. But most of all, the thing that always kept me coming back were the players at the table engaging in my world and stories. But after my last D&D campaign, I needed a shakeup. And over the years, I've collected TTRPGs and have run a number of one-shots trying out different systems. Hunter the Vigil, Everyday Heroes, Deadlands Classic, Pokemon 5e, Ghostbusters role-playing game, and Savage Worlds Adventure Edition. They were all systems I'd run at least one-shot for, and had even considered or tried campaigns. But they never lasted. I do enjoy these systems and what they have to offer, though I wanted something a bit different. So then I picked up Daggerheart, a system and game that had honestly surprised me. It had just enough complexity to not be too simple or vague, and it was much easier to learn and teach than D&D. So then came the challenge of getting my fiancée to try a TTRPG. Initially, I had convinced her to try D&D 5e, and that didn't go as well as I had hoped. It was no fault of the DM, of course, but it was a problem of the wrong group of players. So, we tried again, with the promise of more familiar faces and that it would be different this time. And when she asked about the prospect of playing a Webkinz Google in the game, I surprised her, because I was all for adding them as a species in this new world I was making for this new system, Daggerheart. So, Kugel was born, her first ever character. Well, not technically her first character, but it was the first character that she felt attached to and connected with. Ever since we started to play, she's begun to go through the same journey I had with D&D as a player. The immersion of becoming a character, the epic feelings of victory, the despair of perilous moments, and importantly, the emotions with the game. And recently, we've talked about the early stages of a future campaign slash one shot. We plan on using the same system, but with a different friend taking up the reins as a GM. And then she began asking questions about GMing and making worlds. And it dawned on me. I'd become exactly like my first ever GM. A man who helped inspire a nervous and unsure player to possibly become a GM themselves as well as a player. And without realizing, I'd done so twice now. And it is a beautiful thing to say the least, inspiring others. I think the thing that I love most about tabletop RPGs, it's not the stories, it's not just the worlds, it's this sense of excitement that always seems to accompany it. With the right people, a world, pieces of a story, dice, and a GM who has passion for the stories they will tell with their players, tabletop RPGs make for some of the most entertaining and enveloping stories of all. You are experiencing and helping to mold the story firsthand. You don't think of it as you and some friends around a table. You think of it as yourself experiencing those moments as your character. And that right there is why I love tabletop RPGs. Thank you for tuning in, and I will see you in the next episode of Why I Love.